Welcome to the Artist Work Ethic Podcast. I'm Mike Pelak. I'm a screenwriter and filmmaker who's always looking to maximize my time and potential as I work to break in. In this podcast, I talk to artists of all kinds who have seen success in their fields about their process, habits, and work ethic. All right, Ben, thanks for coming on with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I know I already told you this before you were rolling, but congrats on the new podcast and stoked for you.
Thank you. So you were playing drums in the band Random Task prior to Armor for Sleep. When Random Task ended, what was your vision for Armor for Sleep and how did you implement that vision?
You know, actually, I left Random Task and they were still going. So basically what happened is we had been playing together. Evan and Jeremiah and I had been playing from 6th grade to 8th grade, but we didn't have a singer. We were just basically covering like Green Day and Nirvana songs. And then from 9th grade to 12th grade, we went to a different high school and we found Matt Goldman, who became the singer of, our band that we called Random Task. So after senior year of high school, we were all going away to different colleges. Evan and I were going to Rutgers. Matt was going to BU. And Jeremiah was going somewhere else in Boston. But I didn't want to do the band anymore in college. So I quit, and they actually still went on and did some awesome stuff together for the next couple of years. And I had kind of been writing songs during our senior year for Random Task, just out of necessity because I wanted us to record an album, but I had the ability to write songs. So long story short, the summer before I went to Rutgers, I just made a demo by myself and called it Armor for Sleep. And I sent it to like 2 of the label contacts that I had that I'd made through Random Task. And I didn't really have some grand vision. And it just so happened that I think like one of the 2 labels I sent it to called me back like the day after they heard it. And they were like, "Hey, we want to sign you." And I was like, "It's not a real band. It's like, there's nothing there yet." So yeah, I just kind of like fell into it by things kind of happening. Like, it's not like I didn't put myself out there, but there was not a grand plan. And I didn't have this scheme or this business plan that I was implementing. I just kind of like fell one thing after the other, I guess.
Once you had Armor for Sleep going, what kind of work ethic did you and or the band as a whole maintain to push it up to the levels that you did get to?
I've actually been thinking a lot about this recently, just I guess facing my own work habits. I don't know how many other people do this, but I know for me, I was always the kid doing my homework on the bus the morning of school. I was always waiting till the last minute to do everything, which is, by the way, a horrible personality trait. And I hate that about myself. And I'm the same way about songwriting too. And I feel like unless I have little like goals like, oh, we booked a recording date at Nada because we want to do a demo, like I would probably never finish songs. But like the whole history of just everything that happened was like, there were dates when like music had to be done by, and then I did it. That's just kind of the way that I work, I guess. And like songs are so weird. Like you would think like a 3-minute song, you could technically write a song in 4 minutes. You know what I mean? Like why can't people write hundreds and hundreds of songs? Like for me, it's not about the time spent doing it. I guess it's about being in a place where something cool would come out. And I guess you can't really I've learned in my life, I can't force that to happen.
I mean, one of the things I talked to Heath Saraceno and, kind of how Midtown handled things as they were ramping up. And he was telling me that those guys, they were all in Rutgers and had jobs and were hitting a practice space at 2 a.m., however many nights a week. And that was kind of one of those things that those guys put into play.
I was actually going to bring up Gabe as an example, as someone who I would say is on the other end of the spectrum work-wise. And I think Gabe is one of the talented and most intelligent people I've ever met. And he's played a huge role in our band. But he is like a business person where he will have a plan. He will be like, we're going to put in the hours and do this. And that's awesome, and that's worked for him, and there's no knock against that. It's just like starkly different from my method of waiting till the last minute and hoping things work out, and then sometimes they do.
I think Gabe managed you guys for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you picked up some of those characteristics or traits from him?
Unfortunately, his work ethic didn't really rub off on me so much. I feel like it's, for me at least, it's always been about just, I don't know, maybe I'm afraid of like a finished product, but I wait till the last minute, and then when confronted with a hard deadline, I'm like, well, I literally have to make something good, or else I'm just going to be embarrassed. So no, I don't think Gabe's work ethic did rub off on me. Maybe I wish it had, but it's there's just, I guess there's just a different thing. But also, that being said, like, again, someone can sit in a room and write 100 songs in a day, but are they going to be good? Like, what's the difference between a good song and a bad song? And then we get into the question of like art and like, how do you get better at something that is so subjective?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, would you say that there were any, whether it's songwriting or the business side of things, would you say there were any lessons learned that you or your band as a whole brought forward from previous projects?
I think I've learned a lot more now than I did at when I started Armor for Sleep. I think when I started Armor for Sleep and when the rest of the guys joined the band, we were just kind of like falling through life. I think I've learned a lot now about music and songs that I learned from like my whole experience. I guess one of the things that I learned is that a lot of times, especially with music, things aren't immediate, so you can put out an album, and no matter how much you want to blitz people with it, sometimes it takes a while for people to like listen to a song or an album and be like, you know what, this is really cool. But I think if something is really good, eventually it'll find a fan base. And I think maybe when I was younger, I got really frustrated, like, why isn't this happening sooner? And I guess I just didn't understand that with music, sometimes it just really takes a long time for things to catch on. And that's different if you're like a Taylor Swift and you're having songs on the radio. But just in terms of like, if you're a young kid and you want to start a band that's going to have an impact, I would just say, like, if you do want to do that and your songs are really good, to understand that it could take a really long time. But if it's good, it will resonate with people eventually, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I've found with my own artistic endeavors that perseverance has probably been one of the more important, things for me. Of course, there's talent, there's luck, there's networking, there's all that type of stuff. But taking screenwriting, for example, I've watched peers already fall away, after a few years of trying to pursue it. And totally. I haven't fallen away. And I've started to see more success in that world. And it sounds like perseverance was important to you. And, would you say
right,
perseverance was important to your success?
I would say passion for something is more important than perseverance. For instance, I like writing too, but for me, in order for me to like write like whatever, a screenplay every year, I would have to like force myself to do it, which isn't bad. But I think, when I look back at how long I was playing music, I started playing drums when I was in 4th grade and played, in a band up until I was, 28 before we stopped touring. So like, I never woke up every day and was like, I need to persevere with music. Every day I'm going to make a schedule for myself. It was just something that I was actually really passionate about. And that's another thing that I learned. So, I've read a bunch of screenwriting books too, just because that's like something interesting to me. And I know a lot of times they're like, just write every day. I believe that if you have to like, put a note on their fridge to remind you to write every day, it just might be hard in the long run to do it. Whereas if you just have a passion and it's just something that like you have an idea and you're like, no, I need to write every day just because it's a part of me. I think that's probably more effective, but also you can't train yourself to have a passion for something. Either you're like just writing is a part of you and you're just like so connected to it that you do it every day, from my experience and the people in my life, the people that are successful at things, it's just like, that's just who they are. Like they're just a writer and they've been writing since like, fourth grade. And over the course of time, after a bunch of bad screenplays, like something sells. And then they've also,
I think that, the passion that you mentioned is something that can't be replaced. It can't really be cultivated either. Like you said, you're either someone who just wants to write when they want to write, or someone who I almost feel like it's what's your true motivation for wanting to create something then, and that could go to any of the arts. Are you working to create something because you think it's going to be, you're on a stage in front of 2,500 people, or you're going to be walking into the Chinese theater one day? Or is it because you just love this thing and you believe in it and you want to push it forward and make it as good as possible?
100%. Yeah. And also when I was younger, I used to think like, oh, it must be so easy to go in and engineer a pop song, like how easy is that life? But then like I started listening to like quote unquote pop songs that are huge. And I, the first thing that comes to my head now is like Since You've Been Gone by Kelly Clarkson. Like, yeah, that's a massive pop song, but there is such a kernel of truth in that, like it makes you feel something real. So as like dumb of a pop song as it is, like there's a reason why it works. And it's a lot more complicated than just like, oh, there was like some big songwriter in there, because whoever the songwriter in there was connecting with something that resonated. I think people get in trouble where they think that they figured out how to make a formula that like will sell or resonate, because I think it's more about like connecting with a truth that will connect to an audience and finding what that is, as opposed to like what you think will sell,
Yeah, something authentically relatable.
And that's also, that sounds way more simpler than it actually is. Like that's a whole other rabbit hole to go into.
Yeah. I mean, it's always said that if there's something that you feel passionate about, and even like a podcast, I'm making the podcast that I want to listen to,
Totally.
and hopefully it finds an audience out there of people who also will want to listen to it and find it useful in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not putting any pressure on it like, oh, I want to be number one on a podcast chart. Because if you went into a new thing with that being your main focus, you would probably miss what you're doing now, which is just doing something that you find interesting. And the ironic part about that is when you just focus on something genuine, chances are it finds more success in those kind of arenas.
Absolutely. So you've got an Armor for Sleep tour coming up. I remember hearing you say that you did a film score or a film soundtrack somewhere a couple of years ago. You told me you wrote a screenplay recently. And maybe we already kind of touched on this, but how would you say you structure your day to stay focused and productive when you need to be?
That's a really good question. Well, if I'm doing some kind of like creative thing, like finishing the screenplay or finishing songs, I've never had like a schedule of like, I need to wake up and do the work this time. I mean, I have things that I do to keep me sane. Like I know I'm way happier and more focused when I go to the gym every morning. I personally do CrossFit. Again, maybe it's because I'm lazy, but I just show up to a CrossFit class and a coach tells me what workout to do. So I do it. Otherwise, if I couldn't trust myself to go to the gym and work out by myself. That's why I like CrossFit. So I know if I do that, I'm happier. And I know that when I was trying to finish my screenplay, it was so overwhelming until I outlined everything. And once I kind of gave it a spine and I had, like a paper that had basically 15 plot points, and then it becomes much easier because you're like, how do I link the first one to the second one? And then you're like, oh, what could happen there? And I guess it's the same kind of with songs, and the way I've always done songs is through the lens of an album. So for songs, I usually just have like a bunch of them kind of floating in the ether. And I'm like, oh, a goal of mine would be to do an album for whatever reason. Then I'm like, what songs could fit on there? And then once, I start like reaching into that pickle jar, I'm like picking out whatever the 10 to 15 songs that could form the album. It's almost like it is for me with the outline of the screenplay, where it's like I start to see some kind of structure and like something makes sense as like that collection of songs. And for me, that makes it easier to write because I'm not just kind of like stabbing at the air. I'm like, oh, this is going to be the middle track of the album. So like it would be cool if it had this mood, or like this is going to be the last song in the album. So like this has to be some kind of release, you know? So that's not really like a scheduling question. That's just more of like how I go from, you know, staring at a blank computer screen to actually like getting in Logic or writing. To me, I guess outlining makes me excited about like doing it and actually doing like the boring grunt work.
I mean, outlining makes everything easier too. I wrote my first screenplay without an outline, and it's really bad.
Wow.
Really bad.
That's crazy.
Really bad. It was.
Did you have an outline in your head, or are you just kind of like going from scene to scene on the fly?
I had moments in my head, and it was just, it was really just based in inexperience. And I was, opened up Final Draft and was like, I'm just going to write something. And I open it up every now and then to remind myself how far I've come. And there's a few beats in there that I would love to pluck out and put into something that is, much better. I've got to figure out how to place those, because some of them have logic problems, and there's good stuff there. I've written a slew of screenplays since, so I've definitely grown as a writer, but there's some interesting stuff there. But yeah, I did write originally without an outline, and I did that once, and I will never do it again, at least with some kind of outline. Where would you say you find your inspiration to be creative?
I think it goes back to like the first demo that I did for Armor for Sleep, where like I kind of didn't put any effort into like getting it out. And I remember the first people that heard it, just like my friends, the way their like eyes would light up when they talked about it, I realized that they were like connecting to something that I didn't really anticipate. So I was just kind of like, I think, so the process of me with Armor for Sleep was just kind of like exploring that. So I think inspiration for me comes from just being really interested in, I guess, the emotional either stories or lyrics in songs that can make people want to connect with each other. That's inspiring to me. What's not inspiring to me is music that's just catchy, that it might get stuck in your head, but like doesn't like kind of speak to you on like a deeper level about the human experience, I guess. Like to me, if you can write a movie, and the movies that I've seen that have affected me deeply, and the bands and artists that I've listened to that affected me deeply, have really given my life meaning and made me think about, I guess, existence in a different way. So not saying I have fully mastered or even come close to figuring out how to master how to do that, but that inspires me to want to write Armor for Sleep stuff. Is definitely not to be on MTV anymore or do any of that shit, because that would never happen anymore. But like to think about someone listening to a song 5 years from now, not even knowing what Armor for Sleep is, and just having an experience where they're like, that's, touching some part of me emotionally that is kind of hard to get to in any other way aside from art, and the same thing with a movie. If you can make a movie that's about, it could be about anything, but if there's like an emotional undertone that speaks to people, that's really, I think that's special.
It's a great answer. It's the connection that you feel to someone else, or the connection that that they're going to get out of it. Connection and experience.
Yeah, it's the connection that I'm hoping other people will get. And I think also it comes from a place of like connecting with other people, even though I may never connect with the people that hear the songs or whatever. For some reason, I feel like I'm connecting to them in the future when they're out in space, wherever they are, and that makes me, I guess, feel more whole to a certain extent.
Why do you think you were successful?
I guess, can we pick apart that question? How do you define successful? Because like, if I'm being, you're talking about the success of Armor for Sleep. If you look at the success of Armor for Sleep versus My Chemical Romance or Fall Out Boy or Foo Fighters, were we successful? But if you look at, success based on like, I'm sure a ton of bands that spend years, hoping to get signed, then like, yeah, we were very successful. So it's tough. I mean,
I've had this conversation with a couple other people, and it really is, I guess it's a personal opinion on what the definition of success is. I think to some people it's, did you get to live off of your art for at least a period of time? Mm-hmm. I think to some people it's, did you get to make things that did affect people? And I think as far as I know, you at least toured full time and lived off of Armor for Sleep for, however long. And you definitely, you have a fan base. I would define you as being successful for probably, this is my own opinion, probably those two reasons, that you got to live off of your art and you got to have people consume and appreciate your art.
Listen, I'm not the best singer. I'm not the best guitar player. I think I always connected with the things that made me feel something, and maybe I knew I could do that in a certain way. Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I think maybe it's because I was slightly more interested in the kind of music that made me think about shit. I think maybe in a way that wasn't in the scene at the time. Like, for instance, like I always liked Save the Day way more than New Found Glory, where some of my friends are like New Found Glory fan. Nothing wrong with New Found Glory, but New Found Glory were a little bit more, just like catchy pop punk, where like I was into like what's Chris Connolly singing about being a freak, and like that was just interesting to me. And I think I like kind of followed that road. So any quote unquote, I guess, success we had in our fans is probably linked to that. Over, like, I don't think many people liked our band because they thought I had an amazing voice. If I'm just being honest, I think it was, just kind of like being a little bit weird, maybe.
Is there anything that you have going on that you want to talk about or plug at all?
There are still tickets available to our shows, which had been postponed because I don't know if you heard there was a virus that went around the world last year. So
what?
Yeah, so the shows are actually happening starting at the end of August. We're playing New York, November, I think. So and New Jersey. Yeah, New Jersey too. There are definitely still tickets to Starland. So I would say that, and then just keep. If you guys don't follow me on Instagram, you should do it. I'm so good at social media. And yeah, maybe there'll be stuff in that world coming up in the next few months. That would be
awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Ben, for coming on with me today.
Thanks, dude.
Thank you so much for listening today. Please subscribe to the Artist Work Ethic podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, and please rate and review the show. Follow us on Instagram at The Artist's Work Ethic, and check out theartistsworkethic.com.